Hello and welcome to another episode of Talking Democracy. I'm your host, Daryl Hamlin. Today our guest is local playwright Catherine Trishman, who's achieving steady and critical success for her work exploring issues that touch chords of both the personal and the political. Ms. Trishman's plays may sometimes be set in Ellis County, Kansas, but they've been produced around the U.S. and the world. Today we'll be discussing her work and the role of an artist in public life. Stay with us for Talking Democracy. Welcome back to Talking Democracy. Our guest today is local playwright Catherine Trishman. Welcome, Catherine.
Thanks for having me.
Well, to let our audience know a little bit about you, where are you from?
I was born and raised in Athens, Georgia. I was the daughter of a business school professor, and I stayed there until I was 18 and left home for college.
So, was playwriting something that you aimed at when you went to college?
Not necessarily. I was definitely very passionate about the theater and acting and dancing. And
so how did this develop for you?
Well, I was an English major, and it turns out that I wasn't such a fantastic actress. But I remember that I was cast in a play, and one of our assignments was to write a biography for our character. And my professors, after I performed in this play, told me that my acting wasn't so great, but this biography I had written about this character was fantastic, and that I ought to pursue playwriting.
Was this the first time you had thought about yourself as a writer?
It wasn't the first time that I had thought about myself as a writer per se. I certainly wrote short stories and poetry, bad poetry, in middle school and so forth.
Didn't we all?
Yes. I think that mine may have been worse than most people's.
I don't know. I can show you some stuff.
But that did sort of inspire me to marry this love of language and literature with this performative aspect of myself. And so I took my first playwriting class and was pretty hooked. So
did that make you change your major, or what did you end up graduating after having studied?
I was actually an English major.
Okay.
And like a drama minor.
Okay.
So I took a lot of acting classes and playwriting classes, but also a lot of literature.
So then you graduated. What happened then?
Yes. Well, remarkably, I had landed this job in New York City, and so I skipped graduation. I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I skipped graduation. I moved to New York City to be an assistant, a lowly assistant, to a very famous African-American director named Lloyd Richards, who actually directed Raisin in the Sun on Broadway and all of the works of August Wilson on Broadway, and
well,
he was the dean of Yale.
Exciting.
Yeah, so he was a fantastic man to fetch coffee for, which is what I did for a year or so. But one of the things that he did was he was the artistic director of the O'Neill Playwrights Conference, which is a playwriting conference set in the boyhood town of Eugene O'Neill. Mm-hmm. And every summer at that time, a dozen playwrights would convene in Connecticut and develop plays together. And Lloyd was the artistic director of this program. And just being there and watching the new play development process and meeting all these up-and-coming writers working around the country, I think that was the first time I realized that that's what I wanted to do professionally.
So how many plays have you written, and how many have been produced?
That's a great question. I've probably written, more than a dozen, but certainly only half of those are worthy of being seen or produced. And I think I've had about 6 plays produced.
So tell me about some of the places where they've been produced around the world.
Well, my home theater is the Women's Project Theater in New York City. They've produced 3 of my plays off Broadway, which is nice. My very first professional production was actually at the Bush Theater in London, which was surprising. I had just moved to Kansas, and to get this phone call that my play was going to be produced in London was pretty remarkable. So
what happens when you get a call that says your play's going to be in New York or London? I mean, do you go there to work with the people, or?
Well, certainly if it's a premiere of the work. So if it's a big premiere, which usually if it's in New York or London, it is a big premiere, then the playwright comes for the rehearsal process. So you're there working on the script alongside the director and actors so that you can make sure the material is ready for the public.
Okay, well, we're going to take a little bit of a break right now. When we come back, we're going to start talking about some of your plays.
In the Media Studies Department at Fort Hays State University, opportunities are there for the taking. Media Studies students are taught the abilities and skills needed to succeed in collegiate and professional life. Within the department, students are able to learn, develop, and perfect their skills by producing award-winning shows and broadcasting live on radio. With a hands-on experience available, the Media Studies Department offers students the experience for their future today.
Euthanization has decreased 22% since the 1970s. However, approximately 6 to 8 million dogs and cats are put in animal shelters each year, with 3 to 4 million of those being euthanized. Today's average animal shelter contains over 25% of dogs that are purebreds. Most pets come to find themselves in shelters for a variety of reasons: family tragedies, unlucky circumstances, or irresponsible owners. It is only with help from people like you that we can help prevent the overpopulation problem. Adopt a pet from your local humane society. Even if you can't adopt a pet, contact your local animal shelter and find a way to get involved. Volunteers are always needed. Please be a responsible pet owner. Save a life. Add some joy to your own world.
We're back on Talking Democracy. Our guest today is Catherine Trishman, who's a local playwright here in Hays, Kansas. Welcome back.
Thanks.
So let's start talking a little bit about some of the work, the plays that you've done. We know that they've been produced in many different places, but one of the ones that I'm most intrigued by that got a lot of attention is a play called How the World Began. So what is this play about? Who are these characters?
Well, How the World Began is about a young high school boy named Micah, who's 16, and he's living in a town that has just been decimated by a tornado. And a young teacher from New York named Susan has joined the community to teach biology. And during the sort of first weeks of classes, she makes an underhanded remark about the origins of the universe. Yes. Which Micah takes very personally, and the play is sort of the conflict between the parent and the child's guardian and the teacher as they resolve these issues around what was said or not said in the classroom.
Well, this sounds like the tornado destroying the town. That sounds like Greensburg. Is that where this started for you?
It was certainly one of the points of inspiration. Greensburg was hit by the tornado, of course, maybe a year or two after we moved to Kansas, and I was very struck by that tragedy, as we all were. And I remember reading someone from the town of Greensburg collected all these firsthand stories about the tornado, which were published, and I read all those accounts of that experience, and I went down actually to Greensburg a couple years later after the rebuilding efforts had taken place, just to experience the town and to talk to the people there.
So you did a lot of research for this.
I did a bit.
Is it
yes.
more than what you would normally do for a play because this was a little different?
It depends on the play. I would say it was in the middle. A lot of times if I do a historical piece, it requires a certain kind of research. This was more of a piece that required talking to people and reading sort of firsthand accounts about what took place.
So what kind of conflict do the characters experience in this play?
Well, the conflict really, the surface issue is, of course, creationism versus evolution. But the play doesn't delve so much into sort of the intellectual arguments for those two positions, but it really looks at how the two characters, the teacher and the student, are sort of psychologically dealing with the tragedy that's happened in their lives and how that manifests in this sort of conflict over these issues.
So what kind of things are going on inside for these characters, and what goes on inside of you when these characters are coming to life for you?
That's a great question. I think the 16-year-old Micah, he lost his family in the tornado in the play, so he's dealing with a lot of loss and also a lot of fear. He has a very sort of strong religious faith, but this God that he believes in has just destroyed his town through this tornado, and so he's dealing with a lot of questions of suffering and why God allows suffering in the world, and he's struggling with sort of fear of the wrath of God in his own theological framework. And I think that I have those same questions in my own life. I don't know that when I sat down to write the play that I really was intent upon investigating sort of the theology of suffering.
Do you find yourself working some of those things out?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I remember I was sort of writing this passage where Micah finally explains what he's afraid of, and it's the wrath of God. And I realized that that was my own fear, sort of this unexamined fear that I have, probably rooted in my Southern Baptist upbringing.
So what was going on with the teacher then?
So the teacher, she came to this town that had been destroyed. And again, the town is not Greensburg. It was sort of inspired by Greensburg, but it's a fictional town. And she comes to the town really out of altruistic motivation. She wants to help. But what happens is she's sort of blinded by her own prejudice against religious belief, and she lets these sort of unthinking remarks slip out of her mouth. And I think that what I was interested in investigating with Susan is sort of, we talk a lot about prejudice in terms of race, in terms of gender, but not so much in terms of religious belief, in terms of particularly Christian religious belief. And so I was interested in exploring how this sort of urban, sophisticated character could be blind to her own prejudices in this rural environment.
So is this just a matter of the teacher misspeaking, or is this a matter of she is really sort of forced to kind of double down and really think about who she is in this environment?
Well, certainly, I think that the latter is what happens eventually in the play. But at first, I think it is sort of a moment, a loose tongue. The play actually premiered at South Coast Repertory Theater in Orange County, California. And what was interesting about that was just a couple of years earlier in California, a teacher had told her students to take off their Jesus glasses while they discussed the origins of the universe. And of course, Orange County is a very conservative religious community, so the fact that this teacher who knew that about her students in the community would still let this remark slip. She was an experienced science teacher, she'd been there a long time, and yet obviously she'd been just so fed up with the conflict over this issue that she made this offhanded remark, and of course it caused huge controversy. So it's interesting to see how these frustrations among people, whether educators or students, really rise to the surface when it comes to these topics.
So, but it's not just the conflict between the student and the teacher. Who else is involved in this?
Well, Micah's guardian, Gene Dinkle is the name of the character, gets involved, and he tries to play the role of the peacemaker, but in some ways, in trying to help, he just makes things worse. And you see in the play that the community at large, even though it's a 3-character play, we hear about the community, and we hear about how the controversy is treated on the radio. We hear about how the controversy is responded to by young people in the town who start doing pranks on the teacher. So it affects the community at large. And I think it's one of the situations where whenever there's any community controversy, when sort of the story that gets told about the story is much worse than what actually took place. So an offhanded remark becomes, all of a sudden, she's an evangelist for atheism.
So is this about science versus religion, or is it about something else for you when you're thinking about this play?
I mean, the surface issue is certainly the conflict between science and religion. But the deeper question of the play is just, how do we create meaning in our lives? And what is it about our sort of ideological and spiritual frameworks that reveal the world to us, and the ways in which those various ideologies come into conflict.
Is this the first play you wrote that was set in Kansas?
It is the first play that I wrote that was set in Kansas. And you can certainly see the influence of Western Kansas on the play. Just obviously the tornado, the tornado that's destroyed the town, but also I think in the references to the sort of trees, the references to weather, the time of year, the music. Hopefully this Western Kansas landscape is sort of seeped in the play.
So more recently, you have returned to the Ellis County setting for another play called The Most Deserving. Tell us a little bit about that one.
Well, The Most Deserving, unlike How the World Began, is a comedy. It's about a local arts council that has the job of awarding a $20,000 grant to a deserving artist. And really the conflict of the play is how these different council members argue and cajole and sort of fight behind the scenes for the various artists that they want supported.
So where did this idea come from for you?
Well, a couple of things. First and foremost, I just wanted to write a comedy. All my other work has been sort of dramatic, maybe comic dramas, but I really wanted to write a comedy. And around the time that I was working on the play, of course, Governor Brownback, he eliminated the Arts Council from the State Arts Council. And I was also serving on a couple of committees that were designating grants to various playwrights. And I was just really struck by the politics behind arts patronage. Both the, for lack of a better word, sort of the ridiculousness of the politics behind it sometimes, but also that even though the politicking and the different agendas at play when it comes to giving grants maybe have an element of the absurd and ridiculous about them, but also at the end of the day, those grants mean a lot to the individual artists who receive them. They may not be large amounts. In the play, the grant is called the Living Wage Grant, and it's $20,000. But I don't think our local arts council has ever given that size of grant away.
How do we see these kinds of issues playing themselves out in the story itself?
Well, various characters in the play represent various sort of points in the sort of the politics of arts patronage. So there's the outsider artist, Everett Whiteside, who is a provocateur who creates religious sculptures out of trash. And there's the art professor who thinks that he is the most deserving and that he's brilliant. But of course he's very politically incorrect and says all kinds of things that should not be said in public in polite society. There is Jolene is the head of the Arts Council who just wants to keep the Arts Council funded and who believes that if they give this grant to this outrageous artist that of course they will lose their community support, not to mention their support by the city council. There's also the sort of wealthy patron, the widow who funds most of the grant and wields her power as it suits her.
Are these all people that you've met from time to time in your life?
No. I mean, I always say that, all characters are me to a certain extent. So there's another character is a former auto mechanic named Dwayne who really wants to be an artist. And I think that, Dwayne for me represents that part of me that just is terrified that I'm mediocre and not very good.
So what kind of things are you exploring in this play about art and society?
I'm exploring a couple of things. First, just the politics of art patronage, hopefully with a good dose of humor. Why certain artists get grants over others, why public relations is as big a part of arts patronage as the quality of the art, and also the ways in which sort of deserving artists who may be more on the fringe of society get overlooked by these processes.
We've got to take another little break here, but when we come back, we're going to come back to this question of the artist in a democratic society. Thank you. We're back on Talking Democracy. Today we have a fascinating guest, Catherine Trishman, who's a local playwright and a screenwriter, and we're talking about the role that the artist plays in a democratic society. So you're an artist. How does a play happen for you?
In terms of like the original idea? Or?
Sure. Where does it come from, and how does it get from this place in your head to some stage somewhere in London or New York or San Diego?
I think that plays come to me through a process of association. So sometimes it's a character. Like for the most deserving, the character of Everett Whiteside, the outsider artist, really came to me fully formed. And the conflict of the play sort of grew around him. Or how the world began, really began with landscape, the landscape of Western Kansas and what it meant to me to live in this place now. And then you just start ruminating. I start ruminating over these ideas and filling in the world and the other people that may join this particular character.
So what's the work of making it fully formed when it's not?
Yeah, and then you just have to write draft after draft after draft.
But aren't you just kind of stuck in your head, or how do you get out?
Well, first you have to, get the draft down out on the page. Sometimes I've had my friends come over and read an early draft in my living room, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I have some relationships with theater people, other directors and dramaturgs who I may send the script to for feedback. And then I'll rewrite some more based on that feedback. And then finally, I do have an agent in New York who sends my work out to theaters to see if anyone is interested in producing them.
So let's say you're doing a living room reading with your friends.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you're listening for from all these people who aren't professionals?
That's a great question. I mean, first and foremost, whether someone is a professional or not, they can tell you if they are moved by the work. They can tell you if it provokes them to think about something. And they can also tell you like where there are logic problems in the story. And all my friends are very good at that.
Okay. Well, the artist Kurt Vonnegut, a writer, once famously said that the role of an artist in a democracy is kind of like the role of a canary in a coal mine. The job is to, if not keel over and die at some point, at least to sort of flutter and make a lot of noise and get everybody else's attention about things that are going very, very badly. What do you think the role of an artist in public life is?
I'd agree with him. I mean, I think that the role of the artist is to be a prophet of sorts. I wouldn't say that I am a prophet per se, but certainly I look at our greatest artists, just in terms of playwrights. I think of Tony Kushner and Angels in America and how that play really demanded that our country pay attention to the AIDS crisis and the way that it examined how the AIDS crisis affected us not just politically and culturally, but also spiritually. So I think our greatest artists are prophets, voices in the wilderness who are calling us to pay attention to something that perhaps has been overlooked. In terms of my individual role, I would more humbly suggest that I'm just asking my audiences to reflect about issues that are important to me.
So does it start then sometimes with the character in the story, or does it start more with something you have to say?
I think I never know what it is I have to say until the play is finished.
Do the characters tell you that?
The characters tell you that, and that's actually my favorite thing about writing, is that it unlocks your subconscious to tell you things that you didn't know. And the best moments in the writing process are those moments that surprise you, when all of a sudden a character is more eloquent than you could be, when a character is smarter than you are, when a character has some pool of yearning that you didn't know you had. And those are the most illuminating moments of the writing life.
So then what's a way in which a character has surprised you in the past?
Well, as I mentioned, Micah and How the World Began, I was sort of surprised that he was so scared of the wrath of God. I didn't know that going into the play. And the character of Dwayne in The Most Deserving, I didn't know that he was this hapless artist and that being an artist meant so much to him until I got into the script. So certainly there are surprises in every play.
Now, some of your plays have been commissioned by theaters or by working groups. How is that different from a play that you sort of come up with yourself?
That's a great question. So How the World Began was commissioned by Manhattan Theater Club in New York City through the Sloan Foundation. And the Sloan Foundation is part of their agenda is to support plays that are depict scientists and deal with science issues pertaining to science, which is why I chose the creation and evolution debate to tackle.
So they kind of gave you a topic.
They didn't give me a topic. It just had to be related to science.
So then, did you have something kind of going on in the back of your mind when that came up?
I didn't. I really sort of sat down and said, okay, if I'm going to write a play about science, what am I going to choose? And because I had, been living in Kansas for 3 or 4 years, and my husband Carl, who's a philosophy professor here at Fort Hays State, had been on many panels about evolution and creationism, I knew that was sort of prime territory to explore where I live now.
So how much of your own environment inspires your own creative life?
Tremendously. I mean, I'm writing plays that are set in Western Kansas precisely for the reason that I live here now. And I'm as influenced by the weather and the people and the local newspaper as anyone.
So has Kansas surprised you?
Well, I'm surprised that I live in Kansas. I really am, and I'm surprised by how much I love it here. I love my community of friends, and I love the stark, starry plains. I do.
So then what are the kinds of things that your New York theater friends ask you about Kansas when you go to workshop a play or when it's about to be produced?
Mainly they say, where do you live? What? Really?
Do you get the sense that they understand much about Kansas other than what they hear in
certainly
news?
So many theater people are from other places other than New York. And people are from the heartland working in theater all over. But it is unusual that I am working and living in Kansas while pursuing a professional playwriting career. That is unusual.
So what's changed the most for you as an artist in the trajectory of your career?
That's a great question. I think that the biggest change is my recent turn to comedy. My early plays, everyone died. They were totally tragic. They were like set in historical periods, like after the Great Fire of London or the Civil War, and half the characters died. And I don't know, but something about, almost turning 40 and raising kids, all of a sudden comedy seems a much better road to take.
So do you just see things did you see things that were funny before but just wrote about the serious stuff, or did you just start to understand or see more of the humor in situations that you wanted to write about?
It's interesting. I think that, when I was younger, everything was black and white, really. And as I've gotten older, I just see these shades of gray in human nature. And I guess that really, that's comedy, honestly, are the little things that reveal sort of the absurdity of our psychology and our behavior. And the truth is, my life isn't tragic. I'm a mom to 2 healthy, beautiful kids, and live in a nice community with good friends. Obviously sad and tragic things happen to me, as they do to everyone. But in terms of everyday life, that's more the stuff of comedy.
So if you were kind of at the end of your career, if someone were to sum up your career with one word, what would that word be?
I'm going to go for thought-provoking, even though that's 2 words.
Okay.
Because you could put a hyphen between them and make it 1 word.
Okay.
I just want my work to provoke laughter sometimes, provoke discussion and conversation, whether it's about arts patronage or about the psychology of religion or about family. I just want my plays to encourage a conversation outside the theater.
Are your children artistic?
Not so much in the theater, but certainly my oldest, Sophie, is a very precocious artist. And her sister Martha wants to be like her, but she's 4 yet, so we'll have to see how she turns out.
So are you surprised by how things have turned out in your career?
I'm shocked. I'm surprised that I live in Western Kansas, and I'm surprised that I've had 3 plays off Broadway. Both things are equally shocking to me.
And the play The Most Deserving is actually now running in New York?
It is. It runs through May 5th.
And where is it?
It's the Women's Project Theater at City Center.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. Our guest today has been playwright and screenwriter Catherine Trishman. It's been a pleasure to talk about art and public life with you. As always, we encourage our viewers to check out Talking Democracy and other services offered by the Tiger Media Network at tmn.fhsu.edu. Thanks for joining. See you next week. Okay, so now we're just gonna kind of sit here
Thanks,
and talk
Daryl. It's really good.
while they put the credits in and they just want